Now it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers today. First up, Peyton Marshall. Peyton served in a number of product management, sales, and C-suite roles in the financial services, biopharmaceuticals, healthcare IT, and B2B sales and marketing software spaces. As CEO of Leverage Point, he has worked with a number of world-class companies to address their product management, marketing, and sales challenges. In a little bit, we'll also be joined by Ed Arnold. Ed is our VP of Product here at Leverage Point, and he's held a number of senior positions at the Monitor Group, Communispace, and Diamond Technology Partners, and is a past board member of the Boston Product Management Association. First up, we've got Peyton. So Peyton, welcome.
Thanks, Nick, and welcome everyone. In most organizations, our product management and marketing teams stay busy. Between customer meetings, planning and executing events, coordinating production, coordinating delivery of services, designing marketing collateral, internal meetings, and in the digital age, documents. Sometimes it seems like keeping up with our to-do list defines our job satisfaction. But the reality is that executing tactics without strategy is unproductive. Planning becomes a way to escape from that chaos. The best companies make strategic planning a product management discipline. As Churchill said, plans are worthless, but planning is everything. It's an important point. The process is usually more valuable than the output. So for good planning, let's start with some key questions about our market. At the top of the list, better be our customers. What market do we address? Who are they? Next, use cases. I know it's software language, but it applies to virtually all differentiated products. And it's a universal problem. What do we know about what our customers actually do with our product? How does our product fit their business? How does our product matter for our customers' customers? Then, of course, there are competitors. And at one level, those are the alternatives to our product or solution our customers consider. But often they consider doing nothing as well, or sometimes they're using others of our own products. And whenever we're talking about the competitors, there's the flip side of what's their price. Finally, and all importantly, when it comes to innovative products, it's about their performance, their benefits. How do our products and our competitors' products compare in performance? And what benefits do they deliver to customers on a differentiated basis? So it's useful with answers to all these questions to organize our customers and understand our customers and our competition in a more organized way. And in doing that, it's good to visualize our competitive advantage in a customer-centric framework. So in order to visualize, one of the best ways to do that is a good old-fashioned two-dimensional map. And in this space, in understanding our positioning, a value map becomes a fast and simple visual that helps organize all those thoughts about competitive positioning. A value map is a two-dimensional graph of a market, the price and value of competing alternatives. Prices are shown in a common unit on the y-axis. Value is shown on the x-axis as a weighted average score of performance or benefits. The bubble size reflects sales or market share of each alternative. And if this is a good representation of the market, then points and products down and to the right should be gaining market share over time. For any value map, it's important to be explicit about perspective. There, of course, is our teams, what we hope is honest and objective perspective, and building consensus is a good process. Potentially, if you can understand the competitor's perspective, that helps. And then, of course, there's a customer perspective. So be explicit and understand the differences. The important part and the biggest effort in a value map is usually in the value scores, and there are a few best practices for value scores. First, be customer-centric. Many teams tend to start with features, and product features or performance. And thinking about benefits helps move from the product side to the customer side. So I think we would suggest listing and assessing customer benefits. Even if you're starting off with features, move toward benefits. Weights. These scores are weighted scores. So assess the relative importance of your benefits. And understand there are limits to those weights. They're not necessarily dollarized, sterlingized, or euroized. The scores themselves. Be consistent. Think about consistency in how you score each product or solution and each benefit. And it's a great discipline, if you're going to use your value map effectively, to record the rationale for your scores. Organize your visual results. And there are a couple ways to do that. You can use a quadrant or window pane, or the classic approach in value maps is a fair market value line. And those become a way, not necessarily for precision, but a way to start to understand how you and the competitors are positioned. Finally, be agile. Test and refine. And importantly, consider the difference between customers and our own perspective. So how hard is this? Well, get a start. Have a simple framework. Think through a few benefits and a few weights. Generate an internal, as objective as you can, value map. Then usually that process gives rise to hypotheses. So test them, refine them. Consider customer interviews as a way to understand the customer's perspectives and how they might differ from your own objective perspectives. And then test and refine. So remember, the data don't have to be perfect. It's better to use inadequate data than no data at all. Often, the planning process is more important than the plan, and generating hypotheses here helps as much as obtaining answers. So we find that internal value maps provide insights, and understanding external value maps enhance those insights. So now we're going to look at a few value map applications. And we're going to start by looking at using a value map to understand positioning. Then we'll look at using a value map to monitor market changes and assess the dynamic threats and opportunities that might come to a market. We'll look at using value maps to think about pricing problems and pricing opportunities, as well as thinking about what a competitor response to our pricing decision might be. We'll look at marketing and how a value map might help you design better marketing campaigns. And finally, product innovation, identifying product development and innovation opportunities, before we then turn to how a value map can then help move you towards a quantified, dollarized value model. So I'm going to take the first 5 of these and use one case study example and different perspectives on that case study. And Ed will then follow up with some limitations on the process before he looks at the modeling side. So let's start with our application. It's a lab system that performs analytical tests. And in this market, there's a dominant system with 40% market share that provides reasonable accuracy and reasonable efficiency at a reasonable price. There's a low-end system that's kludgier to use and less accurate, but it's the low-cost approach. There's a recent entrant that has the sort of accuracy characteristics of the dominant system, but has gone for a simpler user interface and streamlined workflow. There's the high end and a premium system, Z, that really came in with higher accuracy than the sort of working dominant system. And that higher end system requires more time and expertise. And then Z really emerged from the usual kind of hodgepodge that we'll just call System W, that are bespoke, configured, assembled different pieces. So let's start from the recent entrants perspective, and let's understand product positioning and differentiation. So the recent entry team builds a value map, and what they do is they gather data on competing prices and annual sales. They then identify, in this case, 4 benefits and assign weights. And those benefits are accuracy, ease of use, reliability, and cost of disposables. Then they score each. And this team has done a good job in doing their scoring. As they've sat down to sort of think about those scores, they have good, consistent scales. They've recorded the rationale so that when they go back, they can remember why they awarded the scores they did. And the outcome of that is a value map, and it provides an initial snapshot of product positioning. Here what you see is the quadrant view of that value map, and that quadrant view reveals that recent entrant, our current team, is not really positioned particularly aggressively. And, you know, often you might enter the market dipping your toe in, really just to try and understand the marketplace. What recent entrant has is modestly higher weighted value with a modestly higher price. And another way to look at their positioning is with a fair market value line. This line happens to go through the origin and through the weighted market average. So again, it suggests the same thing. So if this value map reflects reality and perception, then there's not a lot of expectation that recent entrant will charge in and penetrate this market. Let's change perspectives, and let's change the dominant system X a year later, where dominant system X is kind of on their own. They're seeing stagnant economy to stagnant sales. And if all they did was monitor their own sales, they might not realize what's actually going on. Our value map may not have been perfect, but you'll notice it highlights that recent entrants' market share has grown significantly. Their sales have doubled. And as this team looks at it, they really need to reconsider that value map we just looked at, because clearly ease of use must be more important or a bigger differentiator. So they do it. They double the weight on ease of use, and they increase recent entrants' score on ease of use from 7 to 9, where it was originally. And so now we see the modified value map, you know, and it's more suggestive of recent entrant being priced a little bit more neutrally. Clearly, it's a threat. It may be a bigger threat than we're showing right now. What's interesting about this is the high-end systems almost look like they're out of the fray, and that may be that they actually address a different segment, and we might want to think about segmenting our value maps between different users. So that expresses a hypothesis to investigate. So now we switch perspectives again. Let's go to the low-cost provider as we look at how we might use a value map to identify pricing opportunities and assess competitor response. So our low-end system is having problems. Year over year, their sales have declined 17%. They have activist shareholders, they're under pressure. And so the first thing they do is cut costs. They don't have the money to do R&D. So this group thinks about, can we cut price? And a value map provides a little bit of perspective on that. So here what we see is a price cut only by the low-end system by 20%. And you'll see it suggests that it's really improving that system's positioning. But wait a minute, there's a dominant player, and the dominant player is not going to sit idly by when low-end system Y cuts price. And Y is big enough that the dominant system is likely to react. So what might that then look like? Well, even if the dominant system only cuts price by 10%, all of a sudden that sort of positioning advantage it goes away. So now, let's shift back to our recent entrant. And I know we're changing perspectives rapidly. And let's look at how you can use a value map to think about your marketing campaign. So here we are. We know that ease of use matters. And our recent entrant goes out and does some customer interviews to try and understand better why does it matter so much. And they learn some things. With automated process, lab techs can perform tests that routinely used to be performed by trained scientists. And that's an aha moment for them. Secondly, with better software for QA, lab personnel are just making fewer mistakes, regardless of their training level. So the need to re-perform tests has gone down. So, recent entrant team redoes their value map. And they highlight that really they have two new benefits, and they weight those benefits accordingly. The first one is required expertise, and the second one is likelihood of mistakes. So they add those, they weight, they score them, and the result is a new value map. And that value map, not that different in terms of positioning, whether you look in quadrant form, or whether you look at the fair value line, but there's a very important insight they've had in understanding their benefits better. And that leads to a change in marketing, where the recent entrant team revises their messages and they redesign their marketing programs to focus more on how ease of use actually empowers lab techs to perform tests that used to be done by PhDs. They use case studies of customers to identify specific lab operation savings, and that becomes part of their message. They also do some specific comparisons of redo rates and some of the experience of lab customers, because that redo benefit is something that when messaged properly, they believe will be valued by their customer base. So we've looked at changing the market's perception based on what we learned from the value map. Now let's think about changing the shape of the market itself. And here, what we're going to do is now switch perspectives again to the high-end system. So our high-end system may be more accurate than the recent entrant, but its ease of use and efficiency, are things where really they're at a disadvantage versus the recent entrant. So they consider their product design, and they think about a new product, their simplified system Z, that now we're adding to the value map. And that system is more accurate than the lower end system, so it's comparable to the current system Z instrument. But the new one has more intuitive user interface and improved software. So it has the benefit of ease of use, simplicity, broader use, and the potential for fewer mistakes. And what that new value map shows is that even without a price cut, which they might be tempted to do before, even without a price cut, they have much better positioning with that new simplified system. So what do? They realize they have an opportunity, and they prioritize the development of the new system and better quality software. So as you can see, there's a lot you can do. It's not always perfect, but evolving and improving your understanding helps. So now let's turn it over to Ed.
Well, thank you, Peyton. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about possible next steps with value maps, and to show you an example of how this works in Leverage Point. So we'll start with the assumption that you've gone ahead and you created a value map along the lines that Peyton just described. So how do you decide what more you need to do? So we do that by looking at these 5 questions. First, ask yourself if the benefit scores and the weights are based on solid data. Now, given that it's so easy to create a value map on the fly, you may forget that all you may have at the beginning is just top-of-mind guesses. And if 1 or 2 of those guesses are wildly off, the value map will be distorted. So it's really important that you validate any assumptions you make about customers. Next, consider what the value map tells you about willingness to pay. Now, a good value map can provide insights like we've just seen about where your price is relative to the fair market value line. Either you're a better or worse value than average. But how customers will respond to a specific price point, especially when trade-offs are involved, require other research techniques like conjoint analysis. And likewise, when you're thinking about setting prices, in our experience, B2B customers put a lot of weight on the economics, notably the total cost of ownership. Often, weighted value scores don't always equal dollarized value. So for key strategic projects, doing a follow-up EVE analysis is a wise choice. And then you need to think about how you communicate value to customers. And we've seen many different examples of value maps from various sources, but I can't think of one case where it was used in a customer pitch. And to me, it's obvious that value maps are an internal analysis tool and were never intended to make a business case. And then finally, do value maps identify opportunities for disruptive change? Really, truly innovative, game-changing products like the iPhone actually created demand for benefits that consumers weren't even aware of. And for that reason, I doubt if Steve Jobs ever used the value map. So, what I'm going to do now is going to talk about how value maps fit in the context of these questions, right? So we're going to start off with a case study example. And you begin that case study with what I would say an industry level value map that you see here with all competitors in a space. And then from that, you go into an EVE or a value model analysis showing the economic value versus one particular competitor, and also look at that with respect to what it may mean for pricing and willingness to pay. And then third, ending with a customer value story that focuses on the value for a particular customer. So I'm going to show you that live in the Leverage Point tool. And so we start off by what we call the market. This is the marketing homepage. This is what most of our users see when they first log into Leverage Point. And you'll notice that we have 3 tabs here that correspond to the 3 phases I just talked about. So we start with market analysis. This is where the value maps live. We have value models. And we also have value propositions here. So let's start with a value map. In this case, what we're going to do is we're going to open up this Air Ventus value map, which I have open here. And that was what I had on the slide. And let's just take a look at it. This is a value map for the US market for large industrial heating and AC systems, or HVAC. And in this example, let's all pretend that we're all product managers for this company called Air Ventus. And the team got together and they did their first cut on the value map on our latest soon-to-be launched product, and we're going to call that BTR. So that's what you see here in the green circle. And BTR is designed to be the most reliable and efficient system in the market, and it outperforms all the current competitors. And it suggests here that the price that we're targeting for this at $5 million, as you can see, is still a good value because it's below the fair market value line. And if I scroll down here below, you can see all the data that we use to generate this chart. You see we have a list of all the prices here. And then we have the list of benefits. So where did this come from? Well, there was some market research that talked about what customers really valued in these HVAC systems. And so you'll see here things like reliability, green solution, cost of operations, automation, security. These things are really, really important, and they have these particular weights on it. Then, looking at the performance, and here I'm just going to block out the rationale, we can look at the scores. And our team made an assessment of our performance across these different benefits. And you can see we score ourselves pretty highly. That's why we think that this product is a potential winner. So when you put that all together very quickly, you begin to think that, hey, $5 million is a great price point. But is it, right? So how do we really look at this more closely? Well, the first thing we have to figure out is that who really is our competition here. In this case, the value map is suggesting that, NTG appears to be our closest competitor. And so the next step then with the value model is to really take a close, in-depth look at how BTR competes against NTG. So that's where we get into the value model. Now, what I want to point out here is that when we start to quantify benefits here, we begin to translate them from those qualitative benefits that we had in the value map. So things like green solution, cost of operations, reliability, we're now talking about them in sort of tangible ways, such as saving energy and reducing maintenance costs and avoiding the occurrence of downtime, okay? And as you can see here, quantifying these benefits economically allows you to get some specificity around the magnitude of the value created, which is definitely helpful if we consider willingness to pay and thinking about inevitable go-to-market decision. So this is really important because, a green solution to a customer may mean a lot of different things, and it may be saving some, green dollars and how much they're paying for energy, right? So when we understand how we quantify these values, and we can look at the calculations here for how this is done, we can get to the sense of what this really means to the customer. In this case, over the life of $2.5 million, okay? And that gives us our sense of the differentiation value. Now, when we get into the pricing decision, we start thinking about, well, how much of this value could we actually split between ourselves and the customer? And the team looked at this through a variety of different lenses. They looked at a share of differentiated value, or they did a sensitivity analysis, et cetera. And the team decided that in terms of an initial go-to-market price, this split of roughly 63 to 37%, 63% of the value going to the customer would be tenable in the marketplace. And when we start looking at it in this way, we begin to think that, the value map may have underpriced what the real value of the solution is. Okay, so this kind of informs the go-to-market price. But now the big question is whether the sales teams can actually capture that price when they are meeting customers, and that's where we get to the last part, and we start looking at what we call a value story in Leverage Point. So here we see a published digital value story designed for salespeople to discuss the advantages of BTR with the customer, and providing details about each specific value driver and allowing the customer to customize this analysis to their specific situation. So let's take, for example, we look at that energy calculation here. Perhaps the customer is spending more money on energy than our initial assumption, so we could change that. And maybe we're dealing with a very conservative, whoops, extra decimal there. And then maybe we're dealing with a very conservative or skeptical customer that doesn't believe that we're going to save them that much energy. We can reduce that as well. Okay, so by making these sort of customizations to this value story for that particular customer, here and in the maintenance and in the downtime assumptions, we come up to a value to customer that has a lot more credibility in the eyes of the customer, and therefore be able to justify the more premium price. But even then, customers being customers, they may want to negotiate, and so maybe here we might have to give away the installation costs and reduce that price lower. But even so, in this particular case, you're still having a higher price than you initially came in with. And having a value story like this backed up with a value model ensures that the sales teams are not leaving money on the table. All right, so I'm going to make a few concluding remarks here. So when it comes to developing a B2B value strategy, value maps are a great way to get started, especially when you have a competitive space with multiple direct competitors. But you still need to do a value model to develop a business case because, like we've shown, B2B business purchase decisions are largely based on economics, especially when you have a premium price. And then finally, you're going to need to have a way of telling a compelling value story that sales can tell confidently to customers and that customers will accept. So hope that little example illustrated those points, and now I'll turn it back to Nick.
All right, thanks to Peyton and Ed for sharing those insights. So we've had a few questions come in during the webinar, and there's still time to enter your question into the panel on your screen, so right on the right-hand side. And while you're entering, just a quick reminder to complete the 10-second survey while exiting today's webinar. You'll receive a free copy of our latest white paper on value maps. And you'll also be entered to win, as we already mentioned, the 5 free copies of Dollarizing Differentiation Value. Now, to give you a couple more minutes to enter your questions, just a few quick words about Leverage Point. Our cloud platform allows marketing and product management teams to understand their customers and markets better with value maps and value models. It also enables teams to transform them into effective sales tools, customized interactively by your sales teams to the specifics of your target customers. Peyton and Ed just walked through the ways that value maps are a great foundational step towards building your value models and associated value stories. This is why we recently added robust value mapping capabilities to Leverage Point. But why is it so important to do this? Well, Forrester research states that the first vendor to succeed in communicating a vision of value to executives wins the business 74% of the time. The companies that execute best are the ones that incorporate value strategies throughout the product development process, ensuring that the decisions made at each stage are both effective and efficient. These strategic decisions fall into 3 main categories that are timed with the development, pre-launch, and launch stages. The first is direct product development. Prioritizing features, enhancements, and new products from a customer-centric point of view helps ensure that you are utilizing your development resources in a way that generates products that your customers will value. Once you have aligned your product development efforts with your value model, increase your margins by designing your pricing, offerings, and segmentation to reflect the improved value that you are delivering to your customers. And finally, you want to make sure you have a successful launch by communicating your value story to your customer audience and the wider market. Regardless of whether you're launching a new product, a highly anticipated feature, you're maybe just communicating a pricing increase. Successfully realizing your revenue objectives requires your sales, product, and marketing teams to all be communicating your new value story across all channels. And so if you zoom out a little, Leverage Point enables you to apply a value lens to your business. On the left-hand side, you can see the commercial decisions that you can impact with a solid value strategy. When you design an offer to capture customer value, look to segment or design pricing strategies to reflect your product's value proposition. Having designed your go-to-market strategy, communicate your value story to your audience to maximize your business outcomes. On the right side, you can see these outcomes. By entering a sales process early with your value proposition, you can speed up sales cycles, increase margins and close rates, and execute successful product launches. As with most key business metrics, these outcomes are typically expressed as bottom-line financial results. Based on this, the key question then becomes, how do you translate your value props and value stories into a format that can be revised so the prospect can visualize their own financial results and leave behind a unique presentation that's tailored to them? That answer is case studies. There's a lot of great content that your organization probably already has, but it's static, and it's not tailored to the customer you're trying to speak with. Case studies are a prime example of this. They very clearly give you a crisp background and challenge, and then get straight into solutions and financial results. Buyers download them from your site, they ask for them after a sales call, and they also make buying decisions based off the financial results displayed. So why are salespeople only using them as a leave behind? Why isn't there an easy way to convey your value to your prospect's specific needs? And that's probably because they're not digital, but now they can be. Embedding this information into your sales presentation is the only way to be the first vendor to communicate a vision to value. And remember, according to Forrester, that vendor wins the business 74% of the time. Our customers have achieved 5 to 15% higher win rates and 5 to 25% higher prices when using leverage point value propositions. By connecting the value propositions and value stories that you're creating into your sales team's existing process, you're implementing an organization-wide focus on value from product development all the way to sales. Now, if you found any of that interesting, we'd love to have you enter into a raffle we're doing every month where we digitally transform one of your case studies free of charge. Just check the corresponding box in the exit survey upon leaving the webinar, or you can email us at casestudies@leveragepoint.com. So finally, we've reached a time where we're going to answer everyone's questions. So we've seen a bunch kind of come into the box. So I'm going to read them off one by one, and Peyton and Ed are going to join me. So the first one that we're seeing here is, I don't run product management in my organization, and our product managers are pretty technical. How do I get people started doing value maps or value models? I think Ed?
Yeah, let me take that one. So to get started, well, first of all, it's a team exercise, right? So doing these things alone doesn't give you much insight, but if you get a group of people together, I think it gets people aligned around the same sense of value that you're dealing with. It's important to have a facilitator to work with the team. To run it, and someone who's done value maps or value models before. If not, then you could follow with the resources that we have on our website, and you could do it yourself. And it's always nice to have a tool. I mean, I think one of the reasons why Leverage Point exists is to make these techniques a lot easier to use, or you can build your own tools. But I think having a way to capture that, so you could go back and look at it again and again in digital form, makes a whole lot of sense. So that's how I would start. Again, get together a team, have someone lead the facilitation, and use the right tool, and you're good to go.
Great, thanks, Ed. So the next one we've got is, how can value maps be useful without extensive customer research to support them? Peyton, do you have thoughts on that?
Interesting question. We're in the era of big data, and we're spoiled by the idea that we can get high quality, extensive data almost anywhere we turn. So great customer data would be nice, but data aren't cheap. And the question is really, how big is your market research budget? And the second question is, how important is the product? So the way I think of value maps is, it is very low cost to build an internal value map. And an internal value map exercise reveals all kinds of things in terms of understanding your competitors better, understanding their pricing, and understanding your differentiation. The next level from an internal value map is, take that value map and the hypotheses it's generated, and turn that to a few customer discussions, because usually there are 2 or 3 different questions that emerge where you'd actually like to understand what customers' perceptions are, even if you think you have your own objective capabilities. And that's a pretty low cost approach as well, because good product managers are always talking to selected customers. Finally, there is true market research, and you can certainly do that. I think we're aware of some companies out there who do some pretty extensive value mapping type interviews. I mean, they may be doing other kinds of market research as well. But as I say, you don't have to be big budget in order to get some reasonable insights from a value map.
All right, great. Thanks, Peyton. So next one, so I'm seeing our teams are already using value models. Why would we use value maps in addition?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the advantages of value maps is that, it takes a broader scope of the industry, whereas value models, work best if you're doing a direct comparison to one competitor. And when I work with teams on value models, I think one of the biggest sources of confusion is when they're trying to do an economic analysis with multiple competitors at the same time. That doesn't work. That bogs down. So what's good about a value map is when you're in that situation where you're not really, sure what who the competitive threat is, and they have different capabilities, and you have different segmentation at play. A value map is a nice, I think, step to sort those things out, and then based on that, you can prioritize which value map, which value model you should create, just like I was trying to illustrate in that example there, focusing on the main competitor.
Yeah, Ed, as you say that, I think it's interesting. I think you and I both see teams who are working on their value models all the time, and there are some situations where that comes easily, and there are other situations where it's complicated. And the complicated, often starts with thinking about the alternatives, as you've suggested. It's also the case that you see people having a hard time defining their differentiation, and that differentiation is sort of brought to the fore in a kind of in a pretty direct way when you get a team to sit down and think about the value map, because the first thing they're doing is thinking about the benefits that matter, the benefits where there will be different scores. And the next thing is, okay, so we're not going to be scientific yet, but let's kind of put a score on it. And that's a way to get that conversation going. And the way that conversation usually goes is, so why'd you score that one that way? And that gets people into the rationale. So that part of the exercise is great.
Awesome. Thanks to both of you. I think we have time for a couple more. So I think next one is, where do you obtain the competitive data, and how do you determine the competitors' benefits of corresponding products and product features?
Mm-hmm. Well, there are multiple places, but I think one place to start is just to see what the competitors are saying about themselves, right? They reveal a lot in their own marketing and sales collateral, and sometimes they'll just list out what their key advantages are versus the competition. So I would definitely use that as a starting point. But then, customers are basically a good source of that. Customers love to talk about experiences with other vendors. And so there's a lot of intelligence that's provided, and I think salespeople hear it, and that's a second good source of that. So I think, in terms of getting started, those are the two easiest ways to get competitive information.
Great, awesome, thanks, Ed. So next question we have is, how do we apply these techniques to much lower value products that are sometimes seen as approaching commoditized?
So commoditization is interesting, and it's often the case that products themselves are pretty similar. And so the interesting thing about a value mapping exercise is, before you're really thinking about the sort of hard differences, you're really trying to tease out what some of the soft differences are. And so in the value mapping exercise, it's good to start with, are there some other elements? Is there a brand awareness? Is there some softer reliability perception? Is it about being green? Is it about being more reliable? And so is it about the services we deliver? And the more you sort of start there, I think the more you can begin to say, okay, so what are the perceived differences? And having thought that through, it's then not that huge a step to sort of the quantitative dollarized value. Now, lower value products may not merit a full investment in the value model. And so a value map is actually a pretty good place to just think about positioning. And while there may be flaws in value map derived prices, at least there's some sense that you've you've looked at it in an orderly and organized way, and you do get this fundamental sense of are you positioned in a way that will keep your market share roughly, or are you really sort of positioning to ramp it or decline?
Fantastic. So I think we have time for one more question. So this one is an interesting one. So the fair value line is always presented as a straight line in at least in this presentation, but that is likely seldom the case. The perceived value may decline at higher prices. How do we think about these fair value lines at higher price levels? So,
yeah, interesting question, and I think it highlights some of the points Ed was making earlier. It's a fair value line is really just kind of a tool that helps us have some perspective, and that tool is really kind of about some sense of proportionality, right? So not perfect, and you can be fancy and get as nonlinear as you want, but I actually think the better exercise is once you've sort of thought about it this way, it's do the value model. And the value model gets very directly to the sort of harder, or let's just say maybe more objective customer benefits. And then having understand and dollarize those, you can then sort of think about value capture and how much you might capture as part of the way you get the softer benefits.
Alrighty, well, thanks everyone for those questions, and thanks to Peyton and Ned for those insights. Before we wrap up, I'd like to announce our next Leverage Point webinar. This is one we're really excited about. We're going to have Joanne Smith here to present the first of a two-part webinar series on the 8 pitfalls of value-based pricing and value selling. So the first one is going to be our April webinar, and the second part will be in May. But you can actually sign up for both when you take the survey right after this event. And that's it for us today. So I just want to thank everyone for taking the time to join us, and a special thank you to Peyton and Ed for all your insights. From all of us here at Leverage Point, have a wonderful rest of your week. Take care.